Hey, y'all. I'm Erin Haynes, the host of The Amendment, a brand new weekly podcast on gender, politics, and power, brought to you by the 19th News and Wonder Media Network. You've probably heard the news that this election year, our democracy is at stake. On The Amendment, I'm breaking down what that actually means, specifically for the marginalized folks who depend on our democracy the most. This is a show that dives past the headlines and gets clear on the unfinished work of our democracy. Listen to The Amendment now, wherever you get your podcasts.
Hi, I'm Hillary.
I'm Lark.
And I'm Jessica. And welcome to Hearsay, where we deep dive into the cultural moments that live rent-free in our heads and probably yours too. And today, we are basking in Union Girl Summer. We are talking about unions, which have had a resurgence in pop culture over the last few years, and talking about why they're good for everyone, but especially women. I'm going to start by asking Hillary, Lark, what are y'all's experiences with unions?
Hillary, I feel like you have a very robust union
Well,
career.
but I'm the only non-union member. I'm management.
Boo.
I know.
No, just
I know. Does it help if I know I'm management? No. Yeah. So I grew up in a union household, though we didn't talk about it that way because culturally, I think that's kind of the problem with unions is that for a long time, people didn't identify with them strongly. And especially in, I guess, what we call white-collar jobs or professional jobs, which both my parents are teachers. My dad was a professor. My mom worked at the New Jersey School for the Deaf her whole career. But they were both in unions and, you know, had incredibly stable careers. So much so, and this is like a bizarre fact about my family, both of them had the same job their whole careers. One place, one workplace, one resume item.
Unheard of.
I know.
These days.
I know. My dad.
You can't.
No. And I've always been accused of job jumping. I've been at the law center for 8 years, but still, my dad's like, "Where are you going to go today?" Like the same place. But anyway, yeah. So I grew up in a union household and kind of knew those benefits, but it didn't really sort of come back into my consciousness until before I worked at the law center. In one of those many jobs, I worked at a labor rights organization called Jobs with Justice. Shout out Jay with Jay. And so my job there in communications was to get people to care about unions, to like know they existed and know why it mattered and why it was so important for workers to have that power that they wouldn't get otherwise. And so we would jump on every pop culture conversation. So I am like uniquely qualified for this in that I have tried to gin up union conversations on social media when they weren't even there in that as a professional responsibility.
Making it a moment,
As you should.
But I think one of the things I've thought about over the last few years, as you said, unions are having a moment, is how much that job has gotten easier because, you know, there are headlines all over the place of people unionizing. The moment that I think about the most, I don't know that I've like talked about how much I love soccer on this podcast.
I know, which is wild because it's a huge part of your personality.
It is.
I'm still waiting on Hillary and Lark to take me to their box seats.
Oh, well, Lark has box seats. I don't.
Yes, I do.
I sit with the people.
Come through.
But after the national championship game in 2022, right? Am I saying? Yes. In 2022, the U.S. women's national team came to that game and signed their collective bargaining agreement with U.S. Soccer on the field. And there was the sign up on the field after the game, which was a wonderful game. They held up a sign that said, "Stay tuned for the collective bargaining agreement signing." And I was like, this is my dream come true. That an entire stadium of people is like, what's a collective bargaining agreement?
Right.
People don't know those things.
Nope.
You know, they have these little like rats and mob bosses and like nothing in between on unions. And so it was just like, we have come so far so quickly around unions, which is awesome. Including,
and people stayed. I cried. I was there.
Oh my
it was
God.
magical.
I was, like, filming the whole
and
thing.
at like a huge, I don't want to say everyone stayed, but like everyone had been invested with them in that fight. And that was, I'm sure,
That's
incredible to
incredible.
see. Yeah.
But I was going to say, unions are having a moment, but that's also been true at the Law Center. While working here, you all have joined and formed a union.
Woo-hoo.
And I've gotten to be on the other side of it, but also just thrilled at what it's meant for everyone here. So I know that's part of your experiences too.
Yeah. I mean, I can jump in. We officially unionized shortly after I started, and I got to be on the bargaining committee while we were working on our first collective bargaining agreement. And for those of you that may not be super versed in unions, your collective bargaining agreement is basically the piece of paper and contract between the union and the management of like what's going to happen. That most cases your union has pushed for better policies for everyone, but specifically for folks in the unit and those are the people in the union. So if you're part of the bargaining committee, you are the people on the union side working with management to advocate on behalf of your unit. And I think it was really cool to be a part of that. It was very stressful, and it was like during the start of the pandemic. So there was obviously a lot of urgent things we had top of mind, but also had to think long term, right? We knew this first CBA was going to be for a couple of years. But even in all of that kind of uncertainty and stress, just seeing everyone really, I mean, we have a really union-friendly workplace, as you can imagine, whether you're in the unit officially or not. But seeing everyone collectively come together in solidarity, in support of each other, understanding that even if something doesn't directly impact me, it's for the good of the order and the good of everyone. And I think that, at least for me, is what always fires me up in these pop culture moments. You know, when I see a big union president on TV, like outside the workplace, outside the man, like yelling like that, gives me goosebumps and is just so cool. And I think we're at a point, and we have been for the past couple of years, where people are fed the fuck up of like, shit is bad, right? Wages are stagnant, like no one's happy.
Inflation,
the democracy's crumbling. Yeah, like it's all bad, but we can make it a little less bad if we band together and fight for all of these things in this like capitalist hell that we live in. And there's so much power in that. We've seen that, especially in the past couple hot union summers of just collective power and being able to kind of overtake some of those things in our lives that seem insurmountable or seem like you can't fix them. But with a union, sometimes you can.
We're going to talk about all of the pop culture references.
Pop culture.
Because I feel like the most niche
Plot twist,
one.
they're all bad.
Yeah.
Except
No,
Madagascar.
I still think it was tough. Yeah, I was saying the most niche one I could come up with was Madagascar 2. Hillary, I don't know, it came out like 2008.
It's kind of a sleeper like movie, but it is, I would say, it's like Shrek 2. Shrek 2 is better than Shrek 1.
That's so true.
I think I have seen Shrek 2. I've
it's the best
definitely
one.
never seen a Madagascar.
Okay.
Oh, my whole family saw all of them in theaters.
You have to show your kids Madagascar.
I really dislike animated films.
That's fair, but this one is funny. It's like Shrek. It has like adult jokes.
But the whole thing is in Madagascar 2, the whole reason that they end up in Madagascar is because the plane breaks down. And the penguins of Madagascar, which is also a sideshow, had like all these monkeys that had built the plane. And then the monkeys are like, actually, we want to unionize. And the penguins are like, what do you mean? So like the whole thing is that it takes like months and months and months, and the reason they're stuck is because they're caught up in like collective bargaining and like, what are you talking about? You need like parental leave and like this, that, and the other. I feel like rewatching it as an adult, I was like, oh my god, it's actually really funny.
Right.
It was like well depicted.
Yeah.
And I ended up, negotiating, building the plane, and being able to leave. But
I totally forgot that.
yeah, it was really funny. So that was like my most like niche flashback, but. This is your resident SpongeBob Wikipedia expert here to tell you about the SpongeBob unionizing episode, which is also a good one.
There's the lines. What's the chant he has?
Krusty Krab is unfair. Mr. Krabs is in there. Something is your oppression. So, and then it's like...
Krusty Krabs is unfair. Mr. Krabs is in there standing at the concession plotting his oppression.
Yeah.
That's good.
See, I almost had it like 50-something% of the way there. But it's really good. They're like on strike. And because Mr. Krabs fires them for unionizing. And Mr. Krabs and Squidward come to an agreement and then come back and see that SpongeBob had destroyed the whole Krusty Krab. So then the union is no longer.
That's
so
like,
Mr. Krabs is a scab.
Yeah. I feel like...
Do you have any good ones?
There's like Norma Ray.
Yeah, obviously.
Our Sally Field.
Incredible.
That's a second Sally Field too from Mrs. Doubtfire. Yeah, she's
Sally
in all
Field pod.
The key cultural movies. I definitely watched it as a kid, but not since. There is like a very classic children's book union called Click Clack Moo.
Oh yes, Cows That Type.
Yes, exactly. Where
I love
the cows
that book.
start making demands.
Oh my god!
It's a very pro-union book, and it's like if you're in certain like progressive circles with your kids will get that book, or you will give that book.
That's so cute.
Yeah.
I remember that book being read to us in library, and me being like, I have to buy that book. And I think at the book
the cow
fair,
is onto something.
Yeah, and I feel like my parents probably did.
No milk.
I know it was wow. I'm just making that connection. Wow.
Yeah.
I'm sure my parents.
I don't think
made
I've
that
read
connection,
it.
and I wasn't listening.
Yeah. I think broadly, part of the thing with unions is like it's easy to come up with the jokes or like the greedy, like there are tropes, I guess, that a lot of pop culture depictions kind of rely on. But like the heart of it is like something that's actually hard for people to get around, which is like collectivism in general, because we are mostly raised, or at least I felt like I was raised in a world that was like American dream, individualism, how to get ahead by yourself.
Work hard.
Right, exactly.
You always got to look out for yourself, protect yourself.
Right. All these messages that kind of run counter to the like, maybe I will like come together and it'll be risky, but out of this, like we'll have like be able to shift like our power or the things that are important to us. And until you really like enter work, you don't understand that. So I think that's a piece of it. But it's been really exciting for me, both working here at a place that has a union, to see people get very excited about it on their own, but also just like there's not, I think, at least with the younger generation, there's not this like stigma against it. Like those messages didn't like, all the tropes didn't like, carry through. And that feels like the big victory, that people are open to it at a pretty broad level of like, if we don't stick together, what do we have?
And I think it also kind of has to do with like the loneliness epidemic too, realizing that like the importance of community and what we talk about with like our abortion messaging of like we keep us safe. Same thing is kind of applicable to unions. Like we have to stand together. We have to share. We have to talk about pay transparency. We have to talk about how things are working across teams, across organizations. Because I always talk about like, I think because we're unionized, I feel like we have a lot better like working conditions and benefits compared to other nonprofits in the space. That does not mean we can't be better.
Right.
That also does not mean that like we are the best. You know what I mean?
But
I think we talk
other
about
unions
it,
have told us they've
and we
modeled stuff.
crowdsource.
Off of our CBA, and like some things we did lead the charge on, and that's important to celebrate too.
And I became a union steward this year, this calendar year.
What does a steward do? Tell the people.
A steward, we represent the interests of people in the unit. So if they have like any sort of, so if Lark's like, Jessica, I have a problem, I'll be like, okay, Lark, let's talk about it. So I can sit in with people on meetings with management. I can help move things along. I can take notes. I can literally just be like a presence there. Like I basically facilitate, mediate, take notes, build relationships. I've been really fortunate. Like I think I have like 10 to 15 like buddies.
Yeah.
And I've been having like weekly conversations with them, like to catch up and see how they're doing. And it's just kind of a way for me to like build relationships and also make sure that, everyone's doing okay. Keeping a pulse on like how people are.
And I think that's such a nice, you brought up the loneliness epidemic. Like I remember my parents growing up saying like, never cross the picket line, telling us these things, but still saying, you still may have risk, right? You still could lose your job, or other things could happen to you. And I feel like the collective power, that fear of the quote repercussions or the bad actions of bad management have lessened a little bit. I don't know if it's because, at least in my experience, the unions I've been close to make a good concerted effort to connect with unit members and to let you know I'm here, I've got you in good and in bad. But I also think the pessimist in me wants to believe it's like things are so bad anyway. Like to your point, the American dream of like, you can work as hard as you want your whole life and they can fire you in a moment, so that risk, that bubble of what the idea is of and just what success looks like is so different. And we are understanding that corporations are not going to look out for us. So
you giving yourself to work does not mean your work gives anything to you.
It is a job.
And realizing that is, especially if that was not your worldview, can be very very difficult. But you have to realize it at some point. So we all have firsthand experience about why unions are good for women and they're good for everyone. And that experience is amazing. We can brag about it.
Yeah,
and we will brag about it. But we also have some amazing guests here that are going to be able to talk about the increased awareness of unions and who will be able to talk about it on like a more broad social political scale. We have Liz Schuler, who is the president of the AFL-CIO. She is also on the board of the National Women's Law Center. I first saw her at our 50th anniversary gala, and the hype when she got up, we were like, And
I was screaming.
We had just ratified our CBA too, so collective bargaining agreement, and everyone was having a blast. It was so fun. But we have Liz, and we have Jessica Bush, who is a union iron worker with Iron Workers Local 86.
Shout out.
Yeah, shout out. union proud, baby. And they're both gonna, I'm excited to see what they're going to say and how our conversation goes.
It's gonna be so awesome.
Yeah, I'm excited. I am so thrilled to be here with two amazing guests. I have Liz Schuler here with me. She is the president of the AFL-CIO. And we also have Jesica Bush, who is a union iron worker with Iron Workers Local 86, who has also worked her way up to be a safety professional. Liz, Jesica, thank y'all so much for joining me.
Hi, Jessica. Thank you for having us.
So excited to be here with y'all. And both of you, to say that unions have been a big part of your lives would be the understatement of the century, I'm assuming. And so I would really like to know what your first experiences were when you realized that unions were crucial resources for an ideal work environment.
After you, Jessica.
Okay. I joined the union in 2011, but I have been trying since 2009. And there was like a hiring freeze. That was when the economy and the world just kind of took a downslide. So they were on a hiring freeze, but I didn't give up because I seen the potential. I can't just go and apply for any job. Bottom line. So I knew that I was making $11 an hour. I was a single mother. I had 2 kids. And I was on a mission to provide for my family. And at that time when I joined the union, it was, I believe, starting wage was $24. That was huge for me to be able to provide for my kids. And I knew how vital the union was for me in 2008 when I first learned about the trades. And I had been trying to get in since 2009 and made it 2011 and always knew no matter what life threw at me, I was 2 weeks away from a paycheck.
Yeah, I mean, so many people live paycheck to paycheck, but to have that extra certainty or that extra assurance, I'm sure it is.
And Jessica, that's what they call the union difference, because you know what it's like to work in an industry like construction. If you're not in a union, it's very precarious. You don't have that center of gravity of the union hall when a project ends to be able to go back and sign the books and get dispatched out to another job and have it be seamless, and a place where you can get portable benefits, healthcare, retirement.
Oh, yeah.
And the training and upskilling that you need. The union is the constant for folks in construction and especially for women like Jessica.
Absolutely.
For sure. And Liz, what about you? What was your first experience and understanding the importance of unions?
I was working what is now referred to as the gig economy, but back then we called it the McJob, where you're piecing together 2 and 3 jobs just to make ends meet. And I grew up in a union household. Both my parents worked for the electric utility company in our hometown of Portland, Oregon. And I had worked there also in payroll for a short time. And I had heard that the women clerical workers were trying to organize a union, whereas power linemen already were in the union. And so I wanted to be a part of that organizing campaign because I saw firsthand what the difference was. The power linemen had a union. They had sort of this swagger when they walked through the office. They knew they were going to be listened to and respected. They could speak up without being afraid. Whereas most of the office workers, who were largely women, right, felt like this culture of you should be grateful to have what you have. You shouldn't necessarily feel empowered. And so this notion of forming the union was less about raising pay. It was more about the dignity, the respect, the ability to be seen and heard and have collective power by coming together. Now, the company fought the organizing drive with everything it had because they knew that it would be pretty powerful to have what they call wall-to-wall unit of union workers. So the campaign ultimately failed because they used fear and intimidation. They fired some people. They had captive audience meetings where they called everybody in the auditorium and told them why you shouldn't join a union. And people are generally afraid to lose their jobs, right? It's a pretty risky proposition to form a union because the laws are so broken. But throughout that campaign, it really lit a fire under me. And that's when I went to work for the union full time after that campaign because they knew they needed more women to be organizers if they were going to be successful in organizing more office workers. And so they were really looking toward the future of how to grow the local union. And, today we are organizing in numbers that we haven't seen in a very long time. And we are looking for opportunities for, women and people of color and young people to get off the sidelines into these incredible opportunities for good union jobs, and to have folks like Jesica be the ones who are taking advantage of these opportunities has become my life's work.
And you were talking about how you're seeing organizing numbers like you have not seen in a long time, which is part of the reason that we're doing this episode. 2023 was deemed to be the year of the union because there just seemed to be such an increased visibility. But why do y'all think that we've seen such a resurgence in support for unions and more interest in unionizing?
Absolutely. 2023 was the year of the union, and I think 2024 continues to be, because we're in this moment of profound, I would say, uncertainty and destabilization across the country. A lot of disruption taking place within the world of work. And people are fed up, right? They're fed up with the status quo. They want to know that they can actually be the change that they're looking for. And people are finally connecting those dots that, wow, okay, there's this thing called a union where I can come together with my coworkers and build power. The labor movement, as you've seen, is surging in popularity. I think the latest polls are like 71% of Americans support unions, and 88% of young people under the age of 30 support unions because they see us out there fighting, right? Whether it's actors, going on strike against these multi-billion-dollar studios who want to replace them with AI, and so they used their contract to negotiate protections for their work, for their artistry, for their humanity. Or if you're in an auto plant, like the big three, where, auto workers were saying, you know what, these companies have been making billions of dollars. They've not been sharing the wealth with the people who create those profits, the workers on the line. So they stood up and went out on strike, and you've seen it all across the country because, people are starting to say, we're tired of just being called essential one minute through the pandemic and then being treated as expendable the next.
And I'm glad that people realize that they don't have to just sit and grin and bear it anymore. And so kind of with that in mind, why do y'all think that unions are especially important for women in your personal experience, in your opinion, in your data? Like, I'm very interested because we at the Law Center, we've been pushing this campaign about how unions are good for women, and they're good for everybody, but especially as all of us are women here and have dealt with unions in various capacities. What do y'all think?
For me personally, like I could put woman, I am a woman, here we are, but there is, as a whole, having independence, right? We're all strong women. Women are really coming into themselves, I feel, as the years continue to go on. And being able to be self-sufficient and being able to support your family is huge. If you look back throughout the generations and the years, right, a lot of times women stayed home or, they will raise the kids, obviously. Yeah, but not every woman wants to do that. Or maybe they don't even have kids, but they want to actually have a worth of, I want to do that. I want to make that money. Could I do what you do? Yes. And it is so important for us to lead the way, for us to go on the path less traveled so that the women and the young ones coming behind us, they can see that absolutely yes. Because yes, there are going to probably always be the male dominance and what are you doing here? You don't belong here. And especially as an iron worker, it's usually two sides. Either, dang, you're awesome for being able to do this. Like, good for you. Look at you, bad. Or you have the, why are you here? You don't belong here. You belong barefooted, pregnant in a kitchen somewhere, right? So there's always going to be that because it takes all kinds, right, to make this world go round. But then it takes women like all of us stepping up and being loud and being the voice and letting our actions follow our words. And I feel like the union is so strong for women because it truly gives a sense of security. Like I've had so much security being a union member since I joined.
Let's just take a moment, Jessica, and just say as a tradeswoman, you're a badass, sister, because it's a tough business. And to be an iron worker, you have to know how to weld, and you're working with, obviously steel and infrastructure, and can't be afraid of heights. And, there's so many things that make that a really tough industry for women. And you are defying the odds. And I just want to say thank you for taking a risk. But Jessica mentioned that, being in the union gives her security, gives her the ability to feel protected, whether that's with good health care, good wages, retirement security, pay transparency, and equal pay for equal work. I always say, if you want equal pay, join a union, because your union contract is what determines the pay, no matter who you are or where you come from. So this also protection against discrimination and harassment. Yes, we have laws, but as we know, those laws are often not enforced. The union can be the enforcer. So if you are on a job site where there's discrimination and harassment taking place, you have your union to be your advocate. If you're afraid to go to HR, and we know many women are afraid to file complaints because they feel they'll be retaliated against, the union protects you in that way. So I think there's just this notion, the baseline notion of the power of collective action, and that unions for women are the best protection in all aspects of employment, let alone looking at kind of the ability to upskill and, get to that next job that you want to get to and have a real plan for your future. We think the union is really the best path for women. And I think we're now at officially half the labor movement is women. I think a lot of people have a stereotype that we are pretty male dominated, but that is changing. And we are now the largest organization of working women in the country, with 6.5 million women in the labor movement.
Wow. That's
incredible.
Chills.
Yeah, that we're breaking so many walls and boundaries and barriers, it feels like. But in terms of who benefits and who is fighting for unions, it's us. We're fighting for us. We're taking care of us. And that's just so reassuring to know.
And we're fighting for those who aren't in a union, because that rising tide that lifts all boats, if we're negotiating, childcare investments through our contracts, those employers end up raising the bar for, employers across an entire community. And a lot of those other employers who want to compete for the best workers have to do the same. So there is a ripple effect to what a union can negotiate in the contracts. And we are seeing more and more women getting on those bargaining committees to make sure that we have protections for contraception and reproductive health care. And in this era of attacks, as we know, on a woman's right to control her own body and where to go for reproductive health care, to have that union contract guarantee that right and access to those benefits is very much a relief, I would say, for a lot of our workers who are also fighting for that same protection for other women in their communities.
Undeniably, the impact is felt everywhere. And with that, because we're seeing more stories and concern about union busting. We're seeing it at Amazon. We're seeing it at Starbucks. We're seeing it at a lot of major corporations and organizations. And from y'all's perspective, what would y'all say to workers and organizers who are facing these union busting tactics, who are being pulled in those rooms like you were talking about, Liz, and being told not to form unions, who are being fear-mongered into not acting in their best interest?
I would say hold the line. One of my favorite Tom Morello songs, which is, we have rights. The right to form a union is protected under federal law. The National Labor Relations Act, NLRA, it is a fundamental human right, I would say, to join together freely with your coworkers and form a union. The problem is the laws have been chipped away at. They're badly broken and tilted towards corporations, so they can break the law, often with impunity, or it just takes a long time to catch up to them and adjudicate through the NLRB. So that's why we want to pass the PRO Act, which is a piece of legislation that would tilt the scales back in favor of working people. So you've seen with Starbucks, for example, where, the company was union busting basically at every turn. But the workers stood strong. They stood together. They kept the momentum going. And look at them now. Not only are they have they won their NLRB challenges, held the company accountable, but now are on the way to bargaining a nationwide agreement because of their activism, because of their unity and solidarity. Amazon, another example where people don't realize that companies hire firms, pay them millions of dollars to write a playbook on how to keep a union out of their workplace. They bring workers in and try to intimidate them and harass them in captive audience meetings where they're fed anti-union propaganda. They're followed and surveilled. Often with technology, as we know, in the Amazon warehouse. They follow them into the bathroom. They use heat sensors to see if more than one worker is standing together talking, potentially about forming a union. Oh my gosh. They changed the timing of the stoplight outside the warehouse so that union organizers who were flying outside the gates wouldn't have time to talk to people. So they'll stop at nothing.
Right. So a lot of people are driven by fear because I've been placed on projects where they were non-union companies, but they had to, maybe they were working on a school or a high school or a state job that they were mandatory to have that work to bring on union. They had to hire union. And I remember getting sent out and they were like, hey, we want you to try to, get these guys to come union. And so, of course, I am very high energy and I want to know all the things. And I remember talking to them. And one of the things was that they couldn't understand how to pay dues to work, right? Like they had to pay all this stuff. And I said, okay. And because they've been working with the same company, they're, in their 20s, they've been there since high school, right? So they feel like they have job security. But what happens if this company goes belly up? I said, then what? What are you going to do? Like I said, I hear you with that, but if you understood all of the benefits, I said, what about your medical, your dental, your vision, all of the things that, I am so grateful for, like with our benefits. There's so many benefits that I have to where like things that real life happens that unless you got Aflac, you're kind of up a creek. I honestly feel like it is not really, they're confused or they don't have the knowledge, full understanding. They can only go off of maybe what they heard by maybe somebody that they admire or look up to. With companies trying to do this, like what you were talking about, Liz, I was like, what the heck? They're going to the extremes to keep people separated. And that is because there's strength in numbers. And that is what the union offers us. And so if they deny and keep the separation, then they don't feel the power of the strength. And that is why I feel like they are doing that, is because of fear.
My last question for y'all is, do y'all have any advice for people who want to unionize or for people who want to support unions? Like how can people try to lead or live like a life that is like pro-union and in support of the people that are actively facing like these union busting situations? People who've never even thought about starting a union at their job before. What tips do you have?
Oh, that's all you, Liz.
Well, you can jump in here too. I would say know your rights. First of all, that you have a right to form a union and have a free choice without interference. And a lot of people don't realize that when the first thing they encounter is a hostile company response. The minute the word gets out there, oh my gosh, they're talking about forming a union, it's really amazing the wall of opposition that they start running into. So it takes an act of courage and heroism, again, because the laws are so flawed, and we're working now to change that. But for those who see the wave of momentum, who see that, especially for workers of color who have been on the sidelines in the past, having access to good, high-wage, highly skilled jobs, this is the opportunity. Now is the moment. I mean, I look at Jesica, and women can write their ticket in construction and often have not seen themselves in those jobs in the past because, it's always been a perception or a stereotype. And so I would say that for those who want to join a union, know your rights. Obviously, if you're connected to a union in your community, you can lean on them for support and guidance and resources to help get you there. And of course, our website, aflcio.org, you can find also access to tools and information because we want folks to take advantage of this momentum that we're seeing. And you can form a union in any type of job. And I think that's also a stereotype that you have to be working in heavy industry or, that it's only for certain types of jobs. That is not the case. We have video game workers who are organizing at Microsoft. You have museum workers, cultural workers in Philadelphia, Museum of Art that just joined their local AFSCME union. Nothing is off limits. And I would say, follow your desire for change and, really see the union as the pathway to get there. And in the process, you'll experience this feeling of solidarity that is really hard to explain because when workers come together, they have more power. And certainly with all the change that we're seeing on the horizon for the work of the future with technology and climate change and all the disruptions we're facing, to have that warm blanket of solidarity around you, there's nothing like it.
That was amazing. That knowledge to form a union. I mean, I'm learning so much even here now because I just kind of found it, right? It found me, honestly, and saved my life. But like Liz mentioned, know your rights, but also know your worth. Because honestly, when I was just listening to you, Liz, I'm like, dang, that is so real. Like when you said like workers at Microsoft and gamers and things like that, I'm like, why not? Why not? Because I honestly feel like there's that prejudgment or whatever the word is, or maybe that assumption that if you're union, then you are blue collar out there busting your butt, right? Instead of really learning and knowing, like you said, the laws and knowing what you deserve. Because I honestly feel like like you mentioned, with the union busters, right, coming for you, that is the corporations, right, not wanting to pay you your worth. And not wanting to have the people that are making them rich to answer to, because we're all replaceable, right? Especially in a situation like that. Like when I mentioned I hadn't been looking for a job, it didn't matter if I got laid off. I was back to work whenever I was ready to. But how many people non-union can really say that? You're out searching, like people are hungry, searching for work, a resume after resume. I can't find a job, all of the things. But if you're unionized and you're able to stand together, personally, from experience, it's a no-brainer. It just really is. Keep fighting the good fight. That's my advice.
Jesica, Liz, thank y'all so much for coming and for showing us the importance of the union difference.
Hearsay is a Wonder Media Network production in partnership with the National Women's Law Center. It is hosted and produced by Jessica Baskerville, Lark Lewis, and Hillary Woodward. Our producers are Taylor Williamson and Abby Delk. Jenny Kaplan is our executive producer, and Maddie Foley is our editor. Show art by Andrea Sumner. Obviously, I'm also a union Nepo baby. My dad...
That's like literally the opposite of what a union is. Okay.
That's what I'm self-claiming.